And this just gives us a overview. What they would do, they would teach the subjects. Often they are students or patients, and uh, they are practicing these techniques, meditation techniques, very, very simple, basic techniques for 4 minutes each day and 6 weeks. And they look into different parameters. And as you see here, chronic pain, and these are published articles. You might see another paper that shows where these are published. Chronic pain, 36% reduction in the chronic pain, and lots of them have to take less medication. I got the proper, this was in the clinical journal of pain, and of course in the U.S.A. And then approximately 50% reduction in visits to the hospital. 80% of hypertensive patients, means blood pressure patients, they showed that they had lowered blood pressure, and it remained low for 3 years. Of course, they practiced meditation, continued with the meditation, and it remained low for the 3 years. And in another study, it showed the readings dropped by, on an average, 13 millimeters of mercury. Means if the blood pressure was 153 systolic, it came to 140 and remained like this on an average for more than 3 years. In 3 years follow-up, and possibly it continued longer. 100% of insomnia patients reported improved sleep, and lots of them stopped medications. It goes on and on. You see this statistics and school. What may be of interest for you also, the age, in a physiological age. One is some people say, oh, you look younger or something like that. But physiological age, some parameters in the body, it showed that they were 12 years younger compared to their age, to their chronicle age compared to that. Their physiological age showed 12 years. But this is for those who have been practicing meditation for a long period of time. But those who practiced for a short time, new practitioners, it still showed 5 years and drop in their physiological age. IQ increases and memory increases. But even more interesting, and that is what we are studying today, is the brain gets thicker in certain areas, and gray matter area gets thicker in certain areas. So we are going to see some images of the brain, and that will help us come to the subject of neuroscience. In studies, what is shown here, you see one part of the brain called amygdala that you can see, and certain areas are shown. And the cingulate gyrus, that that area also shows increased volume, increased circulation, gray matter volume increases. That is shown. But amygdala is an area that is like a lower function of the human being, more like a reactive, and impulsive. That is what it deals with. It is fight or flight response. It is moderated from amygdala. And if it is for lower animals, that is it is perfect. It just operates. It is like just a reaction. For example, as a small example, you notice what a child, let us say, he has got a mouse. She sees a mouse. Oh, curious to see the mouse. Mouse comes and bites her, and mouse goes. So she cries. Okay, internally the reaction comes, association comes. That mouse is danger. Amygdala deals with dangers. Amygdala is dealing with threats, and that's why the response, flight or fight response, stress response is operated from amygdala. Now, next time, it just sees a rat, sees a mouse, it will get the same reaction. It sees a picture of a mouse, it will get the same reaction. It doesn't use any, there is no rationality there. It's just a straight reaction. It sees a white cotton wool, you will get the same reaction. So this is the way amygdala functions. There is no rationality there. And as a result, it can get into this reaction unnecessarily many times. And this is what has happened to human beings. They don't have, serious dangers, but just by association, they get into the stress reactions or sometimes, aggressive reactions, more operated from this amygdala level. So if you are to I'm just reading certain nice areas for associated with amygdala. It is danger detector, fight or flight response is moderated from there. Stress response is moderated from there. That area of the brain is a temporal lobe, it is called. And reward-driven behavior, that is amygdala. So danger and reward, it is like a simple reactions. Automatic, impulsive, fast-acting, lower level manager. This is like, so it hasn't got the power to think and to decide independently. It is just reactive, automatic, impulsive. Now we also got another part of the brain, and that is called prefrontal area, prefrontal cortex. And you will see this here. And you can see right at the left-hand side. You can also see amygdala in the brain. And prefrontal cortex is like the senior level manager. That is a nice way to describe it is prefrontal cortex. High level manager, and decision making happens at that level. Most important for us, it can suppress amygdala. It can override what amygdala is doing. So planning is possible, social behavior, it is happening at the amygdala, at the prefrontal cortex level. Logical, rational, you know, regulations, that happens from there. Top-down cognitive control. But it is the senior manager. It can stop amygdala reacting to things. What is happening in the new present generation and society generally, the way the society is operating? Amygdala is becoming more powerful and more reactive. That is the way things are happening. There is a dissociation between the prefrontal cortex and amygdala. And what is observed in the meditation practices, this prefrontal cortex, this is the part of the brain that shows increased activity. The connection between prefrontal cortex and amygdala improves. The gray matter volume of prefrontal cortex improves. If someone has been practicing meditation over a period of few years, it shows that the brain gets thicker and thicker in certain areas of the brain. And you saw in the earlier sketch, we don't need to go there, but there is a cingulate gyrus that deals with empathy, those kind of functions. but is dealing with the regulation between the prefrontal cortex and amygdala. That also gets thicker. The gray matter volume increases in that area. Insula is another area that also dealing with empathy. Again, the gray matter increases. So simple practices. Someone practices for, we are talking about few minutes every day. Over a period of years, it is showing that these areas of the brain, they show increased activity, and it is able to regulate amygdala better. We are going to see another next slide just for our more interest. What we are seeing here is hypothalamus part of the brain. You see that region labeled in the hypothalamus. There's thalamus, and below that is hypothalamus. And hypothalamus is the part of the brain that has connections with what we can say almost everywhere. Very, very interesting area of the brain. So parasympathetic, sympathetic, they all go and connect to hypothalamus. Our amygdala is very close to hypothalamus. Our pituitary gland is just below hypothalamus. It is like if there is a pilot, if the pilot has to sit somewhere, he will sit where there are all the controls are coming there. That is where pilot will sit. So it gives you an insight that this is very likely the location, I would say, action of the soul. I do not necessarily say the soul, is based there. We are talking about invisible, entity, soul, but he has his action, it has to happen from that area. And you see what is underlined, the hypothalamus region. This is where the soul is possibly acting from. And you can also see, it is center of the forehead, not top, but in between the eyes. It is at that sort of level. Excellent. Feel free if you want to say anything, or if you want to ask anything at this point. We will be going to the next area and why it is relevant. But is this a good time? We hear from Bianca.
I think it would be a great time. Yes, so welcome into Bianca, and I know your interest is in exploring all of these connections with mind, body, stress, and how they influence well-being. So yeah, very warm welcome to you. Thank you for joining.
Thank you very much. That was very interesting, Prashant, how you introduced the different brain areas and made that relevant to, well, the functions that each of these areas have. Just to give everyone a nice welcome, my name is Bianca Sawinski, and I am a psychologist in the area of pure psychology and psychobiology. And my area of research looks into the body-mind connection. And that is where I'm particularly interested to see how the way of how we think, perceive, realize, and experience the world, of how that translates into physiological, potentially tangible ways of how we can measure that. And a very interesting concept which I would look at would be the axis between the brain and the hormonal system and the immune system. And that is where you can study, for example, in saliva, in blood, certain substances, hormones, to see how we could be impacted by the way of how we feel and the way of how we perceive stress. And one particular hormone that is interesting would be, for example, cortisol, or another hormone that is related to calmness and connection is called oxytocin. So those two hormones are very important, something that we can measure. And it's it's easy to measure these things because we can measure them in saliva, in urine, in hair, in blood. Something that is not so easy to measure are brain circuits. So what you have seen just right now, what Prashant has explained, these are certain brain regions. So particular brain regions that have been shown to have a function. So the function of an emotionality, threat appraisals, execution of certain, let's say, thoughts. You have thoughts and then want to put them into practice. So meditation in general, and the fact that we can get into a calmer state by not really controlling. So attentional control is not really only controlling our thoughts, but being able to let go of them. And that is what the practice of meditation really does. It's this ability to reduce this self-connection to those thoughts. And that is where we have one area that is, maybe some people are familiar with that. It's called the default mode network. So rather than just certain areas within the brain, which we heard about from Prashant at the moment, the amygdala, the hippocampus, the hypothalamus, the basal ganglia, they are all related to certain pathways. And the default mode network is basically a network in which several areas of the brain are connected. So a network, if you think about what that is it's a pathway, right? So this network is very important and it's particularly in the medial prefrontal cortex, also in other areas, but it's mainly the prefrontal cortex that is activated if those network is connected. And this network typically activates if we are, for example, if we're thinking about ourselves, if we time travel kind of into the past, into the future, thinking to the future, for example, oh my God, I still need to do that, or tomorrow I will have my presentation, or I will have my work. So you are thinking and anxiously starting to set certain thoughts into the future. So that's time traveling, right? In terms of your thoughts can go towards the future. You can also go with your thoughts to the past. And what we call in psychology, we call it rumination. You kind of digest the same thoughts again and again and again. So the default mode network is a network that gets integrated when we do this self-referential, which is the thought about the self. So what did they say to me? How did they say that? What did they mean? What did they mean when they said that? What if I fail? What if I don't do this correctly? What do they think about me? It's all about the self. And the way of how it beautifully connects to Brahma Kumaris is that this self-referential thinking leads to ego building or identity building. So these pathways all relate to who am I as a person, right? And what attributes do I have? It's all about this me centeredness, if we want to see, or want to say it like that. And I like to relate it to ego, the roles, the identity, the attachment that we see with body consciousness, right? So the more we are in this real world, who am I as a body and who am I as an identity? Who am I as a Bianca? I'm a psychologist. I study neuroscience pathway and endocrinology. What does that mean? What does that say about me? So every time when I think about these things as an identity, these default mode network pathways, they activate. So they become very strongly active. And how can we measure that? For example, with functional magnetic resonance imaging techniques, in which we can see the blood flow goes to those areas because blood travels oxygen, nutrients, glucose, and it goes to those areas and it lights those areas up. And that is what you can measure in those brain imaging techniques. And then that actually shows that, oh, wow, when people think about the future, so anxiety, when people think about the past, mental health, rumination, depression, right? These concepts are happening more when we have a stronger default mode network. Now, what's interesting is that meditation and the practice of meditation reduces this activation. So that in my, again, lovely to would have been doing some research with Brahma Kumari's meditation and see really what aspect or what is the key ingredient in there that does that. But something in that practice of this potentially detachment, letting go of trying to think about me as a person in this world, but just the soul, which is this observing the soul and having a peaceful self, that ultimately in this in the soul consciousness activation, it has been shown to reduce the default mode network. And hence, if we go by logic, that leads to better mental health. And that's where we see individuals are talking about the positive effects that meditation practices, peaceful kind of practices, stillness. What that actually does is it reduces this activation that constantly reminds me of who do I need to be in this world? What role do I need to play? And that comes with gender roles, that comes with identity roles, with occupation roles, with maternal, paternal roles that we have. What role do I play that I constantly need to fulfill? And what do I think about myself that reaches this goal? What do I need to do? And constant thoughts about that activates as well as we calm down and as we are letting go of these identities that link to this ego picture of me, who am I? We are reducing those thoughts, and that leads to a slower attachment, a lower attachment, and hence a more peaceful mind and peaceful living. And that's related to mental health. And that is when I measure that physiologically with hormones that circulate in the body. Cortisol goes down, oxytocin goes up, and that leads to better health. So not only mental health, but also physical health. So how do we cultivate it? How do we practice mindfulness in a regular way? Some of you might do it regularly. Some of you might have started. Some of you might need maybe a little bit of a cue to action. I needed to be a person. I was a person that needed a cue to action, to remind myself that is good, to learn about it, that this is good. I did not sense it at first. And then the more you practice it, the more you realize that there is no right way. Because some people might overthink and might want to reach it in a particular way. And once knowing there's no right way, you start to sense it and you feel it. And that is once you started to connect. And this connection is leading for you to learn something, right? So the first time you do something, you don't know how to do it. How did we come to this world? We knew how to breathe. That's the only thing we knew. We knew how to swallow, how to suck. These are the things. Then we learned a little bit, okay, hand gripping, a little bit of balance, posture. Then we learned over, 1 year, we started to learn to walk, right? So everything needed some time for the brain to adjust. So similarly, the way of how we are as adults, the brain needs to adjust to new exposures, stimuli, experiences, practices. And that's what we call neuroplasticity. So neuroplasticity is this brain's, so the word comes from neuro, the nervous system, central nervous system, the brain and the spinal cord that goes down in the back. And plasticity. Plasticity means it's plastic, it's moldable, it's changeable in the good way and in the bad way. So if we think of good ways, or maybe let's think of bad ways first, it might be thinking the same thoughts and having waste thoughts, right? By allowing these thoughts to come, you are creating neuroplasticity for it to be reinforced and for it to be allowed, and it can come again and it come again, and you think it and you engage with it. In psychology, we have these kind of cognitions And then we have metacognition. And metacognition is the way of how we engage with these cognitions. We might have a thought, and then that thought can just go, or it just stays. But the way of how I engage with the thought and how much I believe in this thought and how much I believe thinking about this thought. So the thought and then the thinking, it's a higher level cognition. So the thought comes first. That's cognition. But then metacognition, it's what's above that. It's the thinking of the thought. And that is what rumination ultimately is, because the thought comes first, but then you're engaging with it again. And then but it becomes repetitive and where it becomes toxic. So neuroplasticity here is a negative way, because we are allowing it to continuously come again and again and again. And hence the brain learns that, hey, going these pathways are something, and I'm repeatedly showing exactly that. That's what the brain learns is familiar. And the brain loves familiarity. It gets excited by familiarity because everything is predictable. And so it goes the same pathways and it builds the pathways for it to go faster and easier. And the same way we do in positive ways. So the more you practice something, now we are adding on a practice that was not easy. So we're learning a new skill, learning to sit in stillness, learning to just look at the wall and not engage with any of those thoughts. It's a very difficult skill, right? So we are needing to add something new that we haven't learned because the world is not still. The body conscious world is not still. And so we need to learn how to do this again. So there are glutamate, which is a neurotransmitter that is basically building on for excitement between one nerve and the other to connect. And so glutamate comes again, again, a new connection, a new pathway. And so I see the similarity of when I walk in snow or in sand and you walk for the first time, it's quite hard. But then you leave a footpath and then you go again and then you go again and it becomes faster and easier and then you form a path. And that's how you can form a positive, but also negative, as I explained before. But in the positive, how can we cultivate these things so that we form these snow pathways of just doing it again? And that is with practice. So glutamate is the neurotransmitter that is 80% in our brain. It's the most abundant excitatory, how we call it, excitatory, because it excites each other and it creates a learning response. And that ultimately is neuroplasticity. So we're doing one unfamiliar thing and the brain needs to, oh, what's going on there? And it wants to stop first because it's unfamiliar. Because unfamiliarity is dangerous threat. Like, I don't know what is going on. But as I want to continue doing it, that's when the brain is like, I know what it is. I know what comes. I know how to do this. You have done this many times. And that is where the neuroplasticity, in the positive sense, becomes much easier. How does that work? With something, I'm not going to go to scientific, but it's called long-term potentiation. So we are creating structural and functional elements in the nervous system, such as we're creating more receptors. So between this gap here, we might have certain receptors here that become more abundant. So suddenly, there are more receptors. So if there are more receptors, we can connect and create stronger abilities. And that ultimately makes things easier, because at the beginning they were not easy. And neuroplasticity is ultimately familiarity with practice. Whether something is good or whether something is bad, if you practice it, it becomes even better or even worse. And you decide which way we go with that. But yeah, this is kind of mainly what I wanted to talk about. But if there are any questions in this area or anything that you would like me to elaborate on or repeat or go into more detail, please just go ahead and say something or write it in the chat. We'll be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you so much. There is a very quick question before we maybe come back to Prashant. The cue to action that you mentioned, what is the context? You mentioned about cue to action, if you remember the context.
Yes. I mean, I studied health psychology, which has a lot of models to try and understand our behaviors. We know something is good for us, but we don't do it. We know sugar is bad for us, but we eat sugar. We know smoking is bad for us, but we do it. We know meditation is good for us. Going for walks and exercise is good. Early sleep, and we don't do it, or we don't do it enough, let's say, as a population. There are those people and those people. So cues to action often is a very strong predictor for people who have all the different, I don't want to go into the model, but it has several components to let people to be able to do something. So my behavior to change something into something that I would like to do is predicted by, do I believe I can do it? Do I believe that that behavior actually does something? But then also, if I have all of those prerequisites, the cue to action sometimes is what brings people, they need maybe a buddy. Buddy for exercising is very important. We know in the science, in the literature, that if you connect with someone that wants to do exercise with you, you are more, you are more accountable. You are more committed. You say that you will do it. Some people will talk about it in a way in which they saw manifestation. They talk it into reality. But actually, it's just you're creating a connection that helps you to do it. So I needed this connection with Brahma Kumaris to, and I made that connection. And that is where that was my cue to action. Because I have done some meditation before, but I haven't done it in the right way, I believe. And I haven't, no, I have done it in the right way, but I have learned to do it in a better way, let's say, with Brahma Kumaris, in which you're just connected to something different, something beyond the typical Western meditation, which is just close your eyes, focus on your breath, focus on your body, focus on the weight on the floor, on the back. Where do your feet touch the floor? This is a very physical, meditative, focused state. And yes, I can do that. Brings me into calmness right away. It's great. But there's more beyond that. And that is a different power I've learned with this cue to action to, I feel Brahma Kumaris was a cue to action for me to just explore it in a different way. And yeah, I'm very grateful for that.
That's beautiful. And I'm glad for the question because it opened up something very interesting. And it might be a good cue, sorry to use the pun, to come to Prashant to understand a bit more about this kind of meditation also and tie it in. And also it'd be great to come back to you, Bianca, for some of the questions and your thoughts on this too. So yeah, thank you. Very, very helpful and hopeful.
And thank you, Bianca. So clear and very rich. And certainly you created interest in this practice. So let us create another minute. And during this minute, let us create time for simple practice. And during this time, if you feel, feel free to close the eyes or keep the eyes open, whatever you choose. And important part in this is concentration. And all that we are doing, giving ourselves a very clear image. And we stay with that image, hold that image with the eye of the mind. And this time, the image is of a sky. Very neutral image. Very clear that let us have the image of the sky in a certain color. And then we stay with this image continuously for the next, say, half a minute. Even as we hear the words, we don't let go of that image. world of light and color, world beyond. Region of complete silence. Thank you. At a minimum level, we come to understand how our mind functions. It is very, very interesting for us to know our own mind and how much control we have, but even to know that we can control. Maybe for 10 seconds, maybe for half a minute, we can control, we can decide what is happening here. What normally happens, mind has continuous random thoughts. You are not thinking of it. You don't even know it is happening. But there are continuous random thoughts. Lots of them are cyclical thoughts. And if you stop this, like what we did with this practice in the last minute, just one thought and one experience, it stops these cyclical thoughts and random thoughts. And if you practiced it seriously in the last minute, or if you do it in your free time, you will notice a shift in yourselves. And it is always shift accompanied by happiness and better feeling, and that will last longer, not a minute. You will feel that for a longer period of time. And you come to know, wow, so we can stop these cyclical thoughts. They are not necessary. You didn't even choose to have these thoughts. And you gradually understand you can direct your mind the way you choose. But if Bianca mentioned about different practices, and some practices that address this situation of our amygdala and this fight and flight response better than others. And today we are going to use this little time to discuss how our system works, our interaction with this society, with this life. I'm going to use a board, and you will see an image. You will see the whiteboard on your device. And one thing I'm going to draw here is a representation of our world. This entire world that exists. We are going to spend our life here, and it is represented by this image, a box. And let us come to another image. Let us say here is a broken branch. This, let us say this is a straight line. It's meant to be a branch. It is broken. Here it is broken. More you take support of this broken branch, you will only feel worse. You rely upon it more, you will feel even worse. You just take a little support, you will feel worse because it is broken. It will not feel you better. You will be deceived. You might be taking support and that this will make you feel good, but it results are just opposite. When we are talking about this world, this box that we are seeing here, this box comes with the label, and the label is, it is unpredictable. We don't know what is to happen next second. It is as unpredictable as this. Everything there is not permanent. Everything is going to end. It is not in my control. Nothing there is in my control. I have an exit, guaranteed exit. There will be a time I won't be there at all. And it is changing in front of me. Second to second, it is changing. It is worse than a broken branch. It is just things are going to disappear there. Within this world, if you take any level of support, the word "my" is a word of support. You are going into that world, which is unpredictable, we said, and you are putting the word "my." It will only create in you the inside, the uncertainty. We don't know what is to happen next. It will create in you insecurity. Even though you might, on one hand, you have a little excitement, wow, all this is mine, but subconsciously parallel, the danger is going, message of danger is going to the lower manager. Lower manager, we said amygdala is the lower manager. This is now here, I can lose all this. Whatever you said is mine, I can lose all this. Now the worst thing that can happen is we create a perspective based upon this world inside. That is what we call ego. Ego means your whole idea, you are seeing your life in perspective from within that box. That is the false ego, or generally we just use the word ego. It is not just my, the word I, definition of I is based upon this. And this ego is hardwired to a mentality of a victim for good reason, because everything is there. He's going to disappear. Subconsciously, he knows that there is all the what he thought is I is going to end. And no one likes this. No one likes that I disappear. The animal, the ant, they will fight. They want to survive. And this ego is hardwired for a victim mentality. And that is why the huge reaction comes, like the war that is happening anywhere. And if there's a war happening, behind that is this huge insecurity of the ego. So they are ready to bite. They are ready to go and fight. They are ready to do terrible things. I'm not talking here just at a national level, but at a personal level. It is like a fight or flight response is constantly in action when we are here. We try to solve it by making the ego bigger. We want a bigger head and we want a bigger job. Why? Everything is going well, but we still want more. It is because we think it will solve the problem. But bigger the ego, more is the victim mentality. And now the amygdala is very active, with he's processing dangers from on all fronts. Someone criticizes something, someone may criticize. That itself is a problem for him. Someone did something 10 years ago. He doesn't forget it. That is all in a big files. Many institutions might think this is the way we are made and there is no other option here. But here we are saying there is an option, and option is, even for 1 minute, grasp the perspective from outside of this box. Even for 1 minute, see the whole world from beyond, from outside. Just as we in our practice, we directed our attention beyond sky, image of the sky. Here the perspective is from beyond. And one beautiful way we can do this, a guest can be in your house, but his perspective is from beyond. There is a difference between the perspective of everyone else and the perspective of a guest. In the household, someone criticizes the table, criticizes. Guest is not affected by this. He knows what is right and what is wrong, but there is rationality. Guest can think very differently. He's not impulsive. He is not automatic. He doesn't see it as a danger. He doesn't take things personally, but very much involved. And he may say this is right, or it may be wrong, or it really doesn't matter, but you remain my friend. Guest is free. We have the option to come in this perspective, even for 1 minute, just for 1 minute. It starts like this. And you will notice that during that time, amygdala is given rest. During that time, you are working with prefrontal cortex. You are nourishing that part of your brain that is very important for us, very directly. As Bianca said, there are many practices, relaxation practices, and they all have benefits. But we want to bring in a rationality here. We want to empower this higher manager. We want to make him stronger. The decision making, and he's the only one who is in a position to override amygdala. He's the one who can suppress amygdala, prefrontal cortex. And this is direct. You create this clarity. It is not some chance you might find less stress. No, you create this 1 minute, and 1 minute straight away you are creating that path. This beautiful image. You walk in the snow, you are creating a path in 1 minute. You create another minute, you are creating a path. It is becoming easier straight away. 1 minute is already becoming easier. You create more minutes, it is becoming easier. And now the prefrontal cortex has the power to regulate this system now. There are many things happen in this world. We don't want to run away from here. We want to be involved in this world. And there are people, their behaviors, and many things happen. But you are not seeing them as dangers anymore. There can be criticism also, and there can be loss. That is what the world is. We said it is a world which is unpredictable also, and it has changes, and things come, things go. But it doesn't disturb you. You are having a more stable positioning inside, and you have started something that is very important, and it continues. This change doesn't stay just for 1 day. It is there, deeper change. It will continue with you from today to tomorrow. It has benefits long term. I feel very enthusiastic about this simple practice. And practice in this case is see the whole world from the perspective of a guest. Even Prashant is part of this box here. And we use the word invisible guest. How would a guest see this? Third person perspective. Not I am seeing it, That old I, let us see, that is what the ego is. But third person perspective, anyone can practice, and you will feel straight away different feelings and different feelings, and with that comes rationality and peace and love. This come, and you are then acting from these feelings. Different manager is in charge. I'm, as I said, very enthusiastic because present world, if you are reading any of them, psychology journals or some books, you will hear the one situation of the world. Their mental health problems are on the increase everywhere, and problem is more in younger generation. And if we are to do something about this, we have to teach people how their senior manager, higher manager can be in charge. In studies, it also shows what is really affected is the regulation of the prefrontal cortex and amygdala. That is what is affected by the present lifestyle. And this can be introduced to prevent problems. We don't have to wait for the problem to come and then learn. We can prevent the problem. Maybe I'll stop here. We'll create at some point practice, and we'll create 1 minute at some point.
Yeah, very powerful, because the practice, we actually realize the power of simple idea. We will be going a little over time just to explore this a bit more. And just to pick up one point that you made, we want to be in this world, but with a stable positioning, and that we can play with the perspective of a guest or a visible traveler. And I love this third person perspective, because as Bianca was talking about, like a sort of the track, why we're not fighting the old programming of the self-referential default network, if you like, but creating a new track. So it'd be very interesting to hear what's coming up from Bianca, and also we have a couple of questions, but it'd be great to hear your initial thoughts on these ideas. Thank you.
I was thinking, as Prashant was talking about, the third person perspective of a concept that we use in therapy, which is called reparenting. And what that is ultimately is you're talking to your own self as if we also know it as inner child healing, right? But reparenting is in which you become your own parent with this third voice, in which is like you talk to yourself, you name yourself, and that's a presential, so really being in the present of having, for example, a cookie jar, and you want to eat the cookie jar, you want to eat cookies out of the jar, and you talk to yourself and like, what am I doing here right now? Why do I want to eat those cookies? And it's this, for example, people that have emotional eating issues, right? They stress about things and they want to go right away into eating, and they might binge eat. So these types of people benefit a lot from this third person approach, in which you become the observer of what actually happened here. What did you want to do? Where did that stem from? And you, as the observer, then talk to your own little self ultimately, because that person did not feel safe. They needed to escape from something, some sort of discomfort, some sort of emotionality that then made them be stressed, and they wanted to very quickly cope. And the cookie is a very quick coping mechanism, but it will last only as short. But it's a quite applicable example or analogy of this invisible guest third person perspective, because that's actually what helps us get out of this moment in which we don't understand why we do certain things, which are patterns. You explain it in a specific way. In psychology, we explain it by the way of how we learn to experience the world, and epigenetics, and and learning, basically. So we have learned and we have been conditioned to think in a particular way. But then you get this third person perspective and you observe yourself, like, where are you in all of this? And how much does this matter? And it becomes a very beautiful detaching exercise. And meditation practice does that from a particular perspective, whilst therapy does that from another perspective. And some people might connect with one more than the other, or maybe people see the analogies, but I can see the analogy. It just came up as one thing that we do. Yeah. And it helps.
Opens up a scope, doesn't it, for change. One area that I would love to hear your thoughts on, because what has been highlighted just now is the uncertainty, the broken branch principle, and that this world, we know subconsciously or consciously that it is unpredictable and changing. And that's just a principle. So about cortisol, I was given this article, and it shared that cortisol isn't just stress, but it rises when there is uncertainty. And the brain stays on alert when things feel unfinished or unpredictable. And it settles not just through relaxing, but through closure, clarity, and routine. So it's less about switching off and more about giving the body clear signals that things are complete and safe. And then this aspect, what is really complete and safe, is this more sort of invisible traveler view in this, what was just shared. And it'd be interesting to hear your thoughts on this aspect and any reflections you have.
Yeah. I mean, cortisol is a very complex hormone. It's the end product of a cascade of different precursor hormones. It's part of this axis that we have, which is the brain and the endocrine system, so the hormonal system. So the brain, the hypothalamus, sends to the pituitary gland signals, hey, go and travel down to the kidney to produce cortisol. So there is this cascade. And a lot can happen in this cascade, right? But the body, so I sometimes ask people when I lecture, I ask people, is stress always the same? And people say no. And it's like, no, but biologically, actually, it's always the same. Whether we are stressed about the wedding, or we are showing a meditation practice for the first time, or we are, right, like we need to do a test. There are different stresses, whether we call them eustress or distress. Eustress sometimes in a positive way. They can relate cortisol. They can increase cortisol too. So the expectations, so I've done research on cortisol in the morning. When you are thinking about the day ahead, in the morning, your cortisol rises above what it should be. We call it the cortisol awakening response. Like from waking up, first half an hour, 40 minutes, it rises. And it's particularly the case when you are on a weekday compared to a weekend. So occupational stress. So what does that mean? We interpret it as kind of like as anticipation of the day. What does that mean? It's uncertainty. I don't know what's going to happen during this day. So in the morning, you're already overwhelmed by this. What's going to happen throughout the day? So uncertainty is one of the biggest red flags for the brain, because the brain does not like uncertainty. We would rather be told a lie than be uncertain. And that the brain makes better use biologically with, or neuroscientifically, better use with information that harms us, that is bad for us, than not knowing at all. And that's something that is quite interesting, because it just opens up discussion of just like, yeah, this closure, this having difficult conversations that lead to also growth, which means there is cortisol. There is also another cascade of different hormones that are involved, oxytocin, one important of them, that leads to, after cortisol, to connection, to resolving, to learning, to improving, to being calm. And so for us as human beings, we have these issues with threats, basically, in which we want to be able to predict everything. And I think there was a question before, and I might link it maybe a little bit if I can. The question of how happy do we, how much can we control this level of happiness, and will that level of happiness eventually go down? because we adjust, kind of like the hedonic treadmill theory, which is a concept of best understood from drugs. As we take a drug, we want another dose. We want, oh, now the body got used to it, so we need more concentration of it, more concentration on more often, because the brain already knows what it gets. So in relation to a stimulant such as an external drug, that's very much the case. Now the brain loves predictability. It likes to predict that something is going to happen in the way of how it's expected. And then we believe that's paradoxical. We believe we get happier from predicting, but actually we get stressed. So there's Lisa Feldman Barron, a very, very interesting affective neuroscientist from Northeastern University in London, Boston, who has done a lot of research on the emotionality and the brain of being a prediction machine. And the more we get into predicting, or like this unpredictability of what it does to the body and how emotions rise, and that these emotions actually are very context dependent. So after a few minutes, they actually disappear. But we give it context and feed it with what we think is going to happen. And that's where fear, which was very adaptive, leads to anxiety, which is not adaptive because it's context dependent. We fed it with thoughts that let this uncertainty of something which fearful was good about, because fear is an adaptive primary emotion that leads you to, I'm fearful of this, I should not be stepping forward. It's great. It made us survive. But once we give it the feed of, yes, but what about this? And what about this? And the evidence that fit this, and then less, and what will happen, and catastrophic, right, thoughts, that will predict more, or that will lead to less predictability. And that drives the brain crazy. And it ultimately causes cortisol to be flushed more, because it wants to alert the body that we need to be, now this is the fight and flight response, we need to be ready for this. Whatever is going to come, we need to now be ready and to react. And yeah, there's so much more I can talk about, sorry, but so with there's a Zeigarnik effect, for example, which I talk about, which are these unfinished tasks. So we can very much relate to that maybe on a daily basis. We need to do a task, and then we need to do something else. So we start with one task, and we have this, I call it, we have little tabs open on a laptop, and you see these little tabs open, and the more tabs you have, the more it stresses you out, because the more you need to think about the things that you need to do. So the Zeigarnik effect is we are causing more stress in the body by overthinking of what I need to do, whilst if we write things down, to the brain, it means I've written it down, I'm safe. This is safe. It's written down, I will come back to it. So we can close. So your word of closure is we can close this topic. It's kind of, I call it a distraction sheet. I have a distraction sheet. I put my thoughts down, and then that's what I need to deal with later. The brain can calm down immediately. It's like you're closing all the tabs, and your cortisol levels go down, and then you can focus back on the what you need to do. So one thing is writing it down. Another way is to practice it differently, right?
Apparently that's what Einstein did, so that's a good he didn't really hold things in his head. He said he just wrote it down. So it's quite encouraging.
Yeah.
Very relatable. Yeah, thank you. It'd be interesting to hear Prashant's view or thought. What's coming up for you on this aspect? If you have any comments on unpredictability or something you'd like to add.
Yeah, what was said, and when we said the brain reacts at the moment, this ego that we are talking about, that is using the brain 24 hours. And for the ego, this unpredictability, uncertainty, closure, everything bothers him. And he's a control freak. He tries to control it. But this world is not in our control. How much control I have on what is going to happen today and tomorrow in our lives, what governments are going to do, and maybe some things very close door, whether you will get fuel and whether you will be able to drive. Or this world comes with a label. It is unpredictable. But when we come to the perspective from beyond, third person, he doesn't mind. He doesn't mind it is uncertain. He doesn't mind things are not closed and things cannot. He is quite happy, just like a guest in the house. His perspective is very different to the host. He can be more rational. He can say, okay, I try to do it and it doesn't, then that's fine. He remains a little freer internally. His inner reactions are not at all based upon that box. That's why he is more of a master. We use the word senior manager is in charge, and he can see what can be done, what cannot be done. But this is not a reason for stress, and he is never a victim. We said here, the ego is the one who feels victim. One who is in this third person perspective, he feels never a victim. Many, many things happen. Never a victim, never a beggar. In the ego perspective, is forever a beggar. Begging for something, even begging for some predictability also. That is begging. And we have the option to nourish this. And I like that word Bianca used, cultivate. We have to learn how to cultivate. We understand it, but then we need to create this, give a priority to create time for this.
There was a question, and it may be that you just answered it. So for Prashant, what's the mechanism of meditation to affect the brain in the way that you've explained? Is it the guest perspective?
Yeah, maybe we'll create time and practice it right now.
Yeah.
And the image that you see in front of you, this is very useful.
Before we have the practice, I just want to see if there's anything Bianca would like to add finally, and then potentially we finish with the practice. Was that your idea, Prashant?
Sure, yeah.
Is there anything that you wanted to bring or share?
I mean, it's 10 past. I don't know how much time we have there. I did not fully understand answer the question that there was the first question that disappeared from the chat.
I can
With
read
the
it
hedonic
out.
treadmill. I didn't answer it fully. Like there's so much I can explain, but I don't know how much time we have left.
Yeah, the question was, is there a limit to how much the brain can respond to pleasure chemicals like dopamine and serotonin, so that repeating the same thing gives less happiness over time, like the hedonic treadmill?
Yeah. Yeah. So yes, to answer that, I touched upon it before when I wanted to say that with the drug, and then I wandered off talking about predictability and cortisol again because they're two different things. But so the brain is very bad at predicting what we actually want. So there's very famous research in Harvard by Dan Gilbert who looks into wanting what we think what we want, and then once we obtain it, what we actually feel about it. And that kind of was named affective forecasting, like this ability to just, what will this give me? I relate that sometimes to meditation. Some people might think, oh, meditation will give them a lot. Sometimes some people think it in a very placebo way, kind of effect, in which if I engage in meditation, it will give me a positive effect. So the expectation potentially might be positive and might be too high expectations. Then we have also the nocebo effect, thinking, oh, meditation will not do anything. It will not work with me. It will with others, but not with me. So it actually can create a barrier to that. And these things will affect the way of how we get into this balance of the hedonic treadmill. So the adaptation ultimately leads to this internal peace, because dopamine, I think the question asked about particularly dopamine, serotonin, kind of from like this pleasure-seeking predictability from that perspective, because the brain, as it gets more content stimulation, and we know it from social media, going through constant small new bits of information, that's what the brain needs to get excited about, and that's why we have dopamine rushes. So little spikes of dopamine every time there's something novel, 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 and it's movement and stimulations and colors, and they all cause the brain to just be, wow, I need to pay attention to this, and this is great, and I want more of it. So it's very motivating and very exciting, right? In the moment that it's being done. Take it away, and we have this dopamine crush, and everything afterwards feels more difficult because the dopamine rush was so maintained in this spike, 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 that when you get out of it, it's kind of like a little crash. It's like you take everything away and suddenly you're buff, like, oof, you sit on wood or stone because before you were kind of like on clouds, and then suddenly you fall down. Rather than preparing yourself into going further down, it's like putting away the phone in a different way. Like sometimes we talk about it with children, of how to get children out of this, is preparing children of like 2 minutes left, and how do we prepare them into avoiding this frustration afterwards. So the dopamine response is a lot about prediction so much. It's not so, it's also the prediction of like, we're getting something new, right? So, but it's external. So the question was about the question that we had before in the chat. It's, we have this hedonic response a lot about these external stimuli, whilst internal, if we have these repeated stimulations, we are down regulating our receptors. We don't have that many receptors, so our neural response becomes less sensitive, and we're kind of like, there's this functional limit. But as we go and practice internal gratification, internal ways of getting dopamine, it's not so high. It's not going to rush and spike as we get it from external practices, such as the phone is the best example, or food, or drugs, or stimulants, coffee. These things are alcohol. They all are increasing dopamine apart from other things. And so it's this adaptation response that leads to a lower response if it is external, whilst practices like meditation, they shift you away from this dopamine driven seeking. Like you don't want to just want to get this dopamine. It gets more into this, let me gain stability, and it's going to be boring. And that's what a lot of people don't understand, is like the boring is what is good. If it's too exciting, it's actually what's too addictive, it's bad for you. And we like it and it's fun, but it's fun only in the moment. I sometimes call it, what's easy now is difficult later. If it's easy now, you have it now, you want to engage in it, but later it's more difficult. You have the cost. What's difficult now, which is meditation sometimes, giving it up, saying no to something. Like neuroplasticity is also inhibiting certain thoughts that are not good, that are wasteful. How can we practice that? It's inhibition, control, giving more attention to certain thoughts and inhibiting others. And that's a practice as well. So it feels potentially boring to people, but ultimately that's where you remain stable. And the stability is, again, we don't want to be just stable going downwards, stable in growth and knowledge and learning and knowing more and adapting and having flexibility. But it's, you learn an internal regulation. And so having these repeated stimulations of mindfulness and practices that are internally focused, that reduces dopamine, that leads to internal regulation, internal stability. And that is something that, yeah, I wanted to explain. I hope I answered that question for the person that asked that.
I'm really glad you brought this in. Actually, it brings a lot of more practical aspects to realize we have to kind of override that or inhibit that kind of drive for excitement. And it feels
Yeah.
like a detoxification in a sense, like
Yeah.
we have it with food. We know that if we resist that, we feel a lot better.
Yeah.
Also, the point you made earlier about accountability, whether it's to the self or someone or a community, that will very much help. And this aspect about acknowledging, writing down. So many very helpful things which are backed by research. It's not just sort of floating. It's been seen and understood. So yeah, many other aspects too. And so I don't know if Prashant has anything to add on that, and also we can maybe start to build in some experience around this guest practice as well.
Yes, let us come to the practice. And let us just reflect on the word guest first. We all have experience of being a guest. Guest is always aware of his exit. Guest has not forgotten his exit. Guest knows that nothing in that place can belong to him. He doesn't want to own anything there. And he also feels he has got nothing to lose. That's why never a victim. Just by being aware that he is a guest, he experiences completely new perspective. He experiences lightness, he experiences freedom, he experiences appreciation. He is friendly, more friendly and more loving. He is secure. He got nothing to lose. That's why he doesn't take anything personally. We remind ourselves that we are guests on this planet. And we see this guest in the image of invisible presence. Guest, almost like a traveler passing through this world. If someone was to just pass through a park, there are lots of wonderful things, but he's just a guest is passing through. Everything is nice, but he doesn't need to own anything there. He just a traveler. Every moment appears like a gift for him. In the same way, this invisible traveler, he is passing through this physical world, planet Earth. He doesn't need to go to the moon and get some view of the rocks. He is visiting this planet Earth. And what an extraordinary gift for him. There are trees and there are colors and there are human beings and there is wind, rain, fog, sound. Everything appears like a great gift. He's just a traveler, invisible traveler. He doesn't own anyone in that world. So he knows he doesn't lose anyone. He doesn't own anything. He never loses anything. Invisible traveler. He doesn't own a single atom there. A complete liberation. Nothing to lose ever. He experiences that freedom of a guest. He experiences that security of a guest. He experiences lightness of a guest. He experiences appreciation. He feels it is a wonderful gift. Every moment is a gift. He experiences gratitude of a guest. Invisible traveler. Seeing this world. No one can have a higher quality of life than the one who is free like this, and one who is so secure like this. No one can have a higher quality of life than the one who is in that perspective. Thank you.
Thank you for holding this space, but also for this encouragement of a simple practice that we can do at any time. It's always there. We can come back to it. It's rational. And with these insights now, we can see this creates a new pattern, a new option, and also incorporates the gratitude, which we know increases that positive psychology. I've just put in the chat the link to a recently completed series of recordings for those if you're new to Raj Yoga. It will go into more depth. This was very much touching on some simple essences, but a bit connected to our journey, the home of the guest, our relationship with this world, and the time that we're in will be also touched in this series, as well as meditation commentaries. So really appreciate your interest. We'll definitely stay in touch. Good luck with your practice, and special thanks to Bianca for joining us. It was really wonderful, and I hope we get to continue the conversation and hear more. I know there's a lot to share. So thanks again. Thank you, Prashant.
Thank you, boss. Thank you, everyone, for joining.
Meet again. Thank you.